Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Verizon Managed Services Podcast, episode 6. In this one, we have a guest, Jason Rivas. He is the CEO and founder of the Talent Department. He'll be joining us on the call today. So, in this one, we're going to be talking about technology and employees in the workforce. So, pretty much anything related to human resources as well as how that coincides with technology. So, how employees view technology, some things that employers can do from not only a cultural standpoint, but a technological standpoint, to help retain and attract employees as well. So, Jason, if you'd kick things off by just talking a little bit more about, how you founded the talent department, exactly what you do and how you work with companies, that'd be really great to hear.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Mitchell. First and foremost, it's wonderful to be here because the topic of human resources is one that a lot of businesses simply shy away from. They hire a company or they hire a service to kind of deal with those issues because it's so mundane from a perspective on day by day. But for a person like me, I've been in HR for more than 15 years. I spent a lot of my time at a company in California that was a managed service providing training company. They would do sales training, they do operations, sales and sales marketing, um, uh, different types of provisions for managed service companies. And what I saw in my time there was that there was a need. There was overpinning need for companies to get really deep into the weeds on HR. And so when I had the opportunity to step out on my own, I looked at it and said, what is missing here? There's nobody that's covering HR from a day by day perspective, from a holistic quarter by quarter or year over year plan. And so oftentimes small companies, medium sized companies will pivot and go to a massive payroll planning company or payroll processing company like ADP. Or like Paychecks. And in some regards, a lot of the new companies sprouting up are doing pieces of HR, but they're doing it poorly. And so when I started the talent department, I said, what am I going to look for in companies that need the help? And I'm looking for companies that truly just need some help in doing it better. Not to say they're doing it badly, it's just that they want to elevate how they're managing their HR for a period of time. And so at the talent department exists to essentially serve managed service companies or any company, really kind of look at HR from a different perspective because it's not as scary as some people would make it look.
Sure. Well, that's a really good overview, and it kind of leads me to my next point because I think you have some good insight on this. And I follow, a lot of things that I see on LinkedIn as well with, viral posts that go around when it comes to, employees and what they expect out of an employer. Specifically, really two big topics that come up to my mind, and specifically regarding technology, is work from home, pay transparency is another thing, good work-life balance, things of that nature. But, from your perspective, what are some of the, popular trends that, employees are really looking for in an employer right now? Because I feel like it's changed, very recently, especially with COVID that happened in 2020. And then, as the great resignation, pretty much, around that time period. And then, then employers are saying nobody wants to work for me anymore. So I'm curious to hear from your perspective what, employees value when it comes to finding an employer, what you
I get
see.
that. Well, the interesting part is you hit the nail right on the head. What COVID did for employees was to open their eyes big time. And the reason I say that is because when COVID came upon, I was still at my training company and we saw it coming. We actually saw the writing on the wall. We saw the shrinking of perspective, and it was happening exponentially fast. We had already developed a plan on what it was like to shrink the talent force into going from home on a backup contingency plan. So if something happened in the office, we could work from home for a period of time until things got back. So we really just tapped that existing plan. But back to the employees out of that scenario really saw that perk-a-fits. What am I getting for doing the job that's beyond the paycheck? And a lot of companies really miss the mark there, man. They really do. They simply look at the paycheck as this is what you get for doing your job. When in fact, a lot of companies need to rise above the paycheck. They need to look at, and a lot of companies are running at Netflix subscriptions, Amazon Prime subscriptions. They're looking at ways to entice and to retain employees that doesn't come across as cheap. Nobody wants that $2 tumbler that you give away to clients that you're giving to employees. What you're giving to employees should be different than what you're giving to prospective clients. Because if
Mhm.
not, the employee is going to feel like you're just giving them, crap that you didn't want to begin with. So employees are looking to be coaxed and endorsed about how they do their job. And they also look for a few other things. One of the other things they look for is they need engagement with their superior, their manager. They need that touch. Too many times employees are hired on, onboarded poorly, meaning that they have maybe a day or two to walk around the office to see what other people are doing. They write that down, and then there's no circle back on that. There's no onboarding plan, which also means they don't meet their manager until something goes wrong. So the manager and the supervisor needs to be a very specific part of their success plan. What I subscribe to is the onboarding plan. So much about what you do needs to be an onboarding plan that both the employee and the employer have a copy of. And if there's changes to it, they're both updated on it. There's nothing worse than starting a new job and thinking, I'm doing so great. And 2 weeks into it, everything stops. And you go, what the heck? What just happened? So onboarding plan, making sure that people know their managers, but then beyond the onboard, you got to know who you're working with, because there's nothing worse than feeling like you're doing a great job and then you're not. Another thing employees are looking for, they need to know that what their work is matters, meaning they have to understand the why of what they do. Every person has to have a why. Why do I do this? And frankly, why do I give a damn about what I do? They have to know that, because if they don't,
Mhm.
they're just working to pay bills and die. What is that about? Nobody wants to do that. There's too many people doing that. So the employees nowadays are looking for the why and what they do. And that has to be connected. You have to connect those dots, because if you don't, the the underpinning current of all of that is this: people rarely leave jobs, but they will leave jobs because of a person. They're evading a predator, they're evading a scenario, they're evading a person on a job they just can't take anymore, and they start rage applying. And we'll get into that later. But the concept of this is so much about what employees are looking for is having a why. Why am I doing a job? Why should I give a damn? Second thing is have a plan. Everybody should have technology that works day one. You know how many people start a job on day one and their email isn't set up, their phone doesn't work, their desk isn't set up? I really believe that when a person comes to their first day on the job, there should be a welcome basket on their damn desk that says, we gave a damn enough to try to do this better. Because their last job, they are thinking of, man, I hope I don't see the hallmarks of what I just left. Man, I hope I don't see that person. And guess what? When you do it badly, they're seeing it again. So
Mhm.
the concept is about doing it better. And my father was a big, big user of a phrase. He would say, nothing should ever be good enough. Good enough means you gave up halfway through it, or you gave up halfway through the process. So we were raised to never do a job good enough. We were raised to do a job to your very best. And I really believe if employers try that more, they try Perkafits, they try doing onboarding better, but they also have a connectivity between who the manager is, who's helping define that why, and who the employee is, and making sure that they conceive of why their job matters. Does that make sense?
Sure, I know that's a lot of things to think about because, like you said before previously, it's a really holistic view on what the employees want. Obviously, there's a little bit on the technology side, and then that personal touch, understanding the why, and then when they start a new job, being treated good, like, hey, welcome to the team, like we're great to have you, instead of like you know see ya, we don't
Yeah.
really we really care. But jumping into kind of a subtopic on that, from a technology standpoint, from your perspective, what tools do you think employers should give to their employees that may help them succeed, whether it be things that are able to track metrics or, what does that really look like? Because I'm not entirely sure what that
I
looks
get
like, but
that.
how can employers use technology to help get those employees in, onboarded quicker, and have a better experience starting in a new role?
And it comes back to planning for success and then working the plan. There's no sense in spending the time developing a plan for success, an onboarding plan to do it all well, and then not assigning individuals to deliver on it. It's no more than doing a project for one of your best customers, and we've figured out how to do this project A, B, C, D, and F, but nobody's assigned to do it, and then we all wonder why it failed. So employers really, really need to look at it from like this perspective, which is first, you have to give technology that works. There's nothing worse than starting a job and looking at a laptop going, who the hell had this last, right? You want to make sure the tech matches the spirit of this new opportunity. Why would you give an employee a recycled, refurbished, and you can see sticker residue that was on it from the last guy that really didn't like his job. So now we have it, but we don't have the budget for something else. So this goes back, we can take that back a little bit farther and looking at budget planning. When we're doing budget planning for the businesses need to plan ahead and say, okay, let's think for a second. How many employees are we going to need next year? But the challenge is they've never really learned how to plan for a new employee. They look at planning as only as salary gap. Oh, we'll just take another $50,000 for base salary. Oh, we'll add another 20% for insurance. And that's it. They stop there when in fact they need to go farther. Webcam needs to be a common thing for everybody because in today's environment, people need to know that they can have flexibility in what they do. Doesn't mean they're going to be remote on day one, but we have to be more open as employers and saying, okay, if something does come up again, we're ready. Because do you remember when COVID hit? You couldn't find a webcam that was relatively inexpensive because the smart people bought them up by the hundreds and were reselling them for 300% profit and getting it. So employers need to tap their managed service providers. They need to talk to their technology companies and say, hey, work with me to figure out how I can do this better. And frankly, Horizon does it very well. They have a very clear concept on what's happening, what's going on, how we're doing it, but they've also understood that there is more room to grow, more room to expand on how they're doing their efforts. So beyond the technology doing well, make sure they have a cell phone that can tether into their laptop if they are going to be remote. And then clearly define what the remote work from home standards are, because if employers don't set those standards, the employees are going to do it for you, and there's a hot mess that happens there. So beyond the tech, beyond the connectivity, you also have to have an instant messaging platform. A lot of companies use Teams. Teams is a very good platform. We used to use, in places I had been before, we used Skype, which turned into something else, and then Spark, which turned into something else. So the concept of this is you have to have an instant messaging platform that is as scalable and as consistent as the things you would depend on, like Windows, like Outlook, like the programs. You have to make sure that people can feel connected, because I'm telling you, during COVID, some of the best employers were doing poker night, game night with their employees that were connected by remote screening. So from that perspective, we have to find time to have fun together. But if you can do that with technology, what a person's mindset is on their first day, second week on the job is, holy cow, these guys do it differently. It's not like the place I just left. That's what we're working on, is why do we give a damn so much about employees starting a great first month and then we let them linger for the next 11? And we just say, hey, we'll see you at the first year review, buddy. Wish you well. We have to find time, and we have to dedicate time to giving a damn about the people who frankly deliver on all the promises we make in leadership.
Sure. No, that's a really good point with we have the activities and technology with get-togethers and stuff like that. I remember at a previous role, because I've been, working remotely for a while, we did that. It was like Friday, it was like kind of like a happy hour thing where, everybody on webcam. I mean, we couldn't go out or anything, but
Yeah.
People would get their drinks and stuff like that, and we would chat for a bit. And that definitely helped just to get to know some of my other coworkers too, because being trapped at home for such a long period of time,
Yeah.
can have effects on mental health. So you got to get outside, and as human beings, I think we're social creatures. We need to interact with other people. If you're just a hermit crab, then it's gonna have negative impacts. But kind of on to my next point, solely on work from home. So it seems to be a little bit, obviously in 2020 and 2021, it was pretty much the norm. But now it seems like there's starting to be pushback with a shift to in-office work, mandatory in-office, and now work from home jobs are extremely coveted. I think there's like 2 employees for every 1 work from home job now, so they're competitive and they're hard to get into. But I'm curious to hear what your perspective is on a work from home environment, because there's one side of the bucket that says no, I know, like Elon Musk, for example, we need our employees in the office 100% of the time. And then there's other companies that support the work from home model. But I'm just curious to hear which one do you think is I mean, I guess right, for lack of a better term. I mean, is there even a right answer to that? Like, for example, company A, is mandatory in office. What are the consequences of that? Company B is work from home. What are some of the benefits or maybe consequences of that from your standpoint?
Well, first thing I would say is that every business has to make the right decision for themselves. No two businesses are the same. And during quarantine, I've been asked this question uh, with uh, with with this underpinning expectation of solve the problem. And what it's like is that for about 2 years during COVID, everybody went vegan. Think of it like that. We all went vegan. Then after 2 years, the people who sell us the groceries say, hey, you're going to only eat steak and you got to eat steak by this day. So our appetites changed on how we do, what we do, why we do it, where we do it, and when we do it. And then all of a sudden, after 2 years, the people who are selling us the food say, "Hey, you know what? I'm going to start running out of food at this day, so start changing your appetite by this day." And it's really difficult for some people to do that. Quite frankly, every business needs to make their decision on which roles can work remotely. Some roles really just can't work remotely. We get that, and a
Mhm.
lot. And what it comes down to is communicating with your employees. Let them know. Listen, during quarantine, we had to do certain things because it was for the best health of the environment and making sure you could continue to support a family and keep a job because we didn't want to think about unemployment. Employees will understand that. But the other thing is when you simply force yourself upon employees saying, hey, we're going to start being back in the office by this day, and it's literally 30 days out, that's a hard pill to swallow because so much of a person's life has been wrapped around this new change, dare I say, the new normal during quarantine. And now we're shifting back to the predetermined normal, and people just don't know how to do it. They've literally been vegan for so long, they don't know how to change. So we need to find a way to bring them back in the office. And there's a way to do it. It means, you know what, let's be back in the office 2 or 3 days out of the week. A hybrid schedule. That seems to work really well for environments where people can work remotely for a period of time. And it's always understood that, listen, hey, Albert's going to be in the office Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So that means Tuesday and Thursday he's at home. Great, no problem. As long as both people know, there shouldn't be an issue. But the other thing that comes out here is how we also managed employees changed during quarantine. We were simply doing everything by wire. We were doing things by Teams, by teleconference. So we weren't really in front of people in the traditional sense. So we had to find new ways to read people's faces, understand how they were responding, how to interpret how they were feeling about their job, while also simultaneously kind of freaking out about what the heck's happening. Because I'll also tell you this, a lot of fear was pushed into employees everywhere about what COVID was, what that meant, how long it was going to happen. So we're also dealing with this post-traumatic stress scenario where people are trying to change, they have a desire to change, but they've been so pushed into this box that they have to figure out how to start peeking out of it. And so you mentioned earlier mental health. Employers also have the responsibility of keeping an eye on issues where they may come up where somebody's just not managing it very well. And it doesn't mean we look at them saying, "Hey, loser, what's wrong?" We ask them earnestly, Albert, I've been noticing you seem a little down today. Is there something I can do? And then shut the heck up. Just let Albert talk. And that means you might get a hot mess of an answer. We get that. But as employers, we don't have the responsibility or the ability rather to simply put a blind eye on it and say it doesn't matter. We need to listen to our employees. We need to make sure that they have the ability to do their job. So your primary question is answered by this. Every business has to make sure that they answer that question for themselves. How can we work remotely? Which roles can work remotely? And then communicating that with your team members, making sure everybody knows, hey, as we transition back into the office, give people a ramp out 2 to 3 months. Because if you're simply forcing yourself on employees with a 2 week deadline, very few people can really do that, especially people with families trying to figure out what their daycare situation is. Because let's just face it, people were also watching their kids and working at the same time during quarantine. As much as we said it wasn't a solution for daycare, it kind of happened without us saying it. So a lot of things need to change in order to come back in the office. And today's employee is looking for that. Today's employee wants to hear what your plan is when they're interviewing for a job. Today's employee is asking, what is your work from home policy? Do you provide for a hybrid schedule? And at what point do I become eligible for that? They're going to ask in interviews now. And if you're not ready for that, your best competitor who's been planning for it, who's been already 10 miles ahead, is starting to think that way, or they already have a plan. So when they interview with them, that great talent is going somewhere else. And we can't do that anymore. We cannot lose great employees to better environments. We have to raise our game.
Sure. No, and that makes a lot of sense from that standpoint. It kind of leads me to my next point, which is, the younger generation of people entering the workforce, specifically Gen Z. It seems to be
Yep.
a really, really hot topic. Me myself, I'm 25, so I'm like right up the cusp. Like technically I'm Gen Z, but at the same time I'm like not. It's kind of weird, born in 1997. But, I'm curious to hear what your perspective is as a whole on Gen Z because, they seem like, there's stereotypes, the TikTok generation, they're lazy, they're entitled. And, it goes to show a little bit. I read, recently that there's over, 7 million, I think it was like American men that are able-bodied, that are able to work, but are choosing not to work. So I'm curious to hear your standpoint of where that disconnect is coming from, whether it's other people or whether it's them finding other ways to make a living, or they're at home, or something they just don't want to work for a traditional type of employer. I'm curious to hear what your standpoint is because it's something that I've seen a lot, and I'm really curious about it myself. Because I don't really see that on a day-to-day basis, but it's something that's happening within the younger generation. So I'm curious to hear what your perspective is on when it comes to employers attracting the younger generation, Gen Z, on bringing them into the workforce.
And you bring up when you said that you were born in 97, I smiled because I graduated high school in 97. So I'm thinking, I get it. And I get it from a different perspective, which is this. The Generation Z employee is so incredibly unique. They grew up in a time where technology was emerging. I mean, the internet came out in my high school in 96. I mean, it was Yahoo and internet searches that you would click search and count to 10 before the screen loaded. So you grew up in a time frame where things were very instantly on. It was right now, which is, I mean, I can't imagine what the world looked like to you. And that's the thing that we have to also remember as employees, as employers. We need to understand that Generation Z, even the millennials, they grew up in a time where technology allowed for instant answers. That also means they've developed an appetite for having instant answers. So when they interview for a job, they're not really pacified with oh, this is what we do and we plan to do it later. They're going to dig into it. Well, what do you mean? So today's employee, the people who are looking for jobs, Generation Z and millennials, they're expecting answers now. They don't expect latency. They don't desire that either. The other thing they're very big on is experiential employment. What am I getting out of this environment in 2 years? And employers can't fathom of the concept that they don't have a lifetime employee. And quite frankly, the lifetime employees where a person will work 45, 50 years on the job is gone, entirely gone, unless you're with the Postal Service, but realistically, even that's changing. Every single facet of employment across the board is changing, especially in small and medium-sized businesses, where when we're hiring somebody, we have to understand that if they're a certain demographic, we need to feed them experiences on the job. We need to be dynamic about what we do. We need to make sure that they're feeling connected to what they do. Remember earlier I said people need to understand their why? This new generation of millennials and Generation Z has really taught employers to think differently. A lot of people credit Generation X. It's really not us. It's really millennials and Generation Z that have really turned the tide and saying, why are we doing this? I have had the benefit of being in boardrooms with millennials, with emerging Generation Z talent that have come out of college. And the way of thinking is so unusually different that it's refreshing. These individuals want to know why we're doing it. Why are we spending money on this when we could do it this way? Why don't we try new technologies to see if we're getting a different result? Because this generation, yourself included, you don't like status quo answers. You don't like doing it like everybody else did. You want to put your brand on it. You want to put your name on it for a period of time, and then you bounce. You're on to the next one, and you're looking for the next experience. So one thing I give employers when they're talking about Generation Z and they're talking about millennials is look for them to be on the job between 2 to 3 years, and then they're going to bounce. They're going to go somewhere else. They're going to figure out what their next challenge is, what they're going to learn next. Be prepared for that. And so the other thing about this is Generation Z and millennials really don't give a damn about 401ks. And all they're thinking of is, what's my take home? What's my take home? And I'll deal with my money my way. And so they need benefits that really make sense. Understandably, some individuals in Generation Z are still on their parents' health plan, so health benefits really don't matter either. And then once they pass the threshold at 25, they need their insurance on their own, of course. So it's got to make sense. They don't want to lose 25 or 40% of their check to benefits. So employers really need to think about what a benefit is. Who is it really serving? Is it really serving our profit and loss, or is it really helping the employee? Because if it's helping the employer more than the employee, you're doing it wrong. Every single benefit, what we're talking about, what we're doing to give somebody something, should really help the person getting it, not the person giving it. And so this is how your generation is redefining the curve, just retraining employers. You know what? The status quo no longer exists. We're here to help you change it. And that's refreshing. And there's nothing wrong with that. We simply need to find ourselves in positions in leadership to embrace it, to bring in new employees to this new fresh minds, to spot these individuals are really light years ahead of us in several regards. They've learned technology. They've had this. There's seventh graders that were Generation Z that were coding, where normally people go to college for that, but there's people coding at sixth and seventh grade. And then they get out in the real world. They don't want to go to college because they're already trained through gaming, the gaming environment, the environment of being able to be around technology that was so instantly available has really turned the tide on what kind of employees we get. But we also have to understand they're different. Don't look at it and label it, look at it and embrace it. That's what I give employers.
Sure. No, I think that's a really, really good insight and answer. That's something that I really haven't heard before, because usually I see, it's either a black and a white type of thing, when it comes to people's answers that I've seen in the past. But
I hear
really
you.
it's a lot more complex
It
than
is.
that from that standpoint. On one side I hear like, the employers and the man, so to speak, is, terrible. And then on the other side, it's, oh, Generation Z is coddled by their parents and they don't want to do anything and they don't want to work anymore. So it kind of leads me to my next question, which is, what are some of the consequences that employers face by not only adapting to these new trends, but not adapting to new technologies to help onboard and keep employees? I mean, what do you see? I guess a broader question would be, what do you see happening in the workforce from, human resources perspective, probably within the next 5 years? Because I've been hearing, things being thrown around too, about a 4-day work week, which is something that, it's completely unheard of for the most part, but some companies are doing it.
Mhm.
So I'm curious to hear, some of your thoughts on what the future may hold from a human resources perspective, and, how employers will change in the onboarding and, employee experience standpoint too.
Well, to be bluntly honest with you, I have a 4-day work week. And as my own employer, as the guy running the ship, and I'm the chief
Mhm.
janitor, the chief officer, all that stuff. Uh, I embraced the 4-day work week because I saw how it could work in so many different employers. But beyond that, it's it's important for employers to understand that the first 3 months for a new employee are everything. Because I tell employers in the first 3 months on the job, the first month should be the employee should understand what they do. Literally, what they do is the first month. The second month on the job is who they're serving. Who are our clients? Why does that matter? And then the third month is about why they do their job. So when they understand these three basic principles, they have a better concept of the grasp of the job and why they should give a damn. Now, what we're also finding with the new generation is that they give employers about 45 to 60 days. So that means that 3-month plan I mentioned is now shrunk to 45 days, and employers have to deliver. They have to deliver a good experience, because if not, I mentioned rage applying earlier. Individuals at their 30 days mark, these new generation individuals are at the 30 days, they're making a decision. Do I like it? Do I not? If I don't, okay, I'm going to start applying other places, because more than likely there's an individual or a set of individuals on the job that are just making this person miserable. So we need to watch the environment. We need to understand that our environment has a personality. And frankly, if it's a toxic environment and you wouldn't want to work there, why the hell are you trying to do something the same? We should try to find different ways to solve problems. And so when people start rage applying, it's set quite simply at the 30 days. If they don't like it or they had a bad day on the job, they go to Indeed, they go to ZipRecruiter, and they just start clicking one tap apply, one click apply, apply for job, go to LinkedIn, and they're just rage applying is where a person simply starts applying for jobs that they want just to get out of the environment that are more than 10 or 15 clicks per day. They're just looking to get the hell out of the environment. Now that's something that's happening. Employers need to understand that the onboard, the experience, this is really what it comes down to, the experience of the employee. If they don't feel like they're connected to what they do, they will find someplace else to go. I've actually seen there's an increase of people who are not even showing up for their first day on the job because the onboarding experience sucked. There was where employees are sitting there going, hey, you know what? I'm so happy to get the job. I signed off the job offer. I'm so excited. And then they don't hear from the company until the day before their job. I subscribe to the theory there should be a track where somebody is being touched. They call. As an HR officer, I have been in positions to change this by saying, listen, after we offer a person a job, I'm making phone calls. Hey, Albert, good to see you. We're going to expect you in a week. Here's a plan. I'm going to send you an email. You should hear from me every 2 days. If you don't, here's my cell phone number. That way, if you have any issues, you call me directly. When people feel like they're valued before they start, they tend to do a more valuable job after they start. Because if they feel disconnected, you're starting a person who has no concept on what's happening. This starts in the interview process. We should be asking questions. Don't get out of the practice of asking, what do you want to do in the first 5 years? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? Because Generation Z and millennials, they don't care. They don't care. And if they gave you an honest answer, they'd say somewhere else. I see myself somewhere else. Then if you heard that as an employer, you're sitting there going, well, what the hell am I hiring you for? So we need to think differently. And so many times, you mentioned this a few minutes ago, which is things used to be black and white. They absolutely did. But just like Dallas isn't on television anymore, just like Dynasty is gone, and I know you hear those things and go, what the hell is that, right? But people who are a little older than I am are going to sit there going, I remember that. Just like those things have passed, so has the black and white period. We are living in the gray. While some people don't like it, this new generation of employees is defining the shades of gray. And I'm going to stay away from that book reference that I just tapped into there because it's in my head right now and I don't want to take the bait. But this new style of employee wants to experience everything they can and then they go, which means we as employers have to find a way of maximizing our 2 years with them and embracing the fact that you may bounce. And then frankly, every quarter, you should be having a one-on-one deep dive about a person, how they're doing, what's going on. It's not a gripe session. More often, it's just keeping track of a person. And if a person says, hey, you know what, I'm applying for a job, great. What are you looking for? Is there something we can do to keep you on board? If there is, let's see, we can talk about it. If not, hey, you know what, it's okay. And we deal with how it impacts our business on our own. We don't make it the employee's problem. Oh man, you're keeping me in a bad position. Oh man, you're doing this. How could you do this to me? That's none of the employee's concern. That's our concern as leadership. We figure that out. The employee's position is to do a great job while they're here, keep them tapped into why they do it, and they move on. If we don't have our ducks in a row by making sure technology is working, nothing worse than a brand new Generation Z employee starting and your internet sucks. It's two pigeons holding a connection together on your damn roof. Nobody wants that. People want to feel like everything is fast, it's instant, and they have instant connectivity to people with answers. Because if you don't, this new generation will find the answers for themselves. And then you consequence them for it. So we have to change how we're thinking. We have to change how we're doing things to get a different result. The status quo is dead.
Sure. No, I think you made a lot of good points, especially from the technology standpoint too. Like you mentioned before, we're so used to having, instant answers for everything when it comes to a technology standpoint. So when you start a new role, you start a new job, you want things to be, moving. It's kind of like this is the bare minimum. This is the basic to have,
Yeah.
A working computer, working cell phone, for example, if you're like in a client facing role, and have everything that you need to be successful in your role. I guess, from another standpoint too, another thing just kind of came up in my head as we're having this conversation in terms of, the actual interview process. Another thing that I've heard too, and I think this might be changing as well, is just the, sole amount of time to, get a specific role. There's, I one time had an experience where I was interviewing for, a position, and I had to go through like 6 rounds of interviews. I ended up not getting it, but 6 rounds of interviews, which required like a in-person presentation with pretty much a full project, like a full day's work essentially that I presented. So I there's interviews out there like that, but in your opinion, in your experience, what do you think about, certain interview processes? Should it be like a set number of interviews before you hire a candidate? Or, what does that look like? Because I hear, you know, entry level role, 3 years of experience and yada, 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 all these requirements. And then it's like 6 interviews too. And people seem to not like that, for good reason. So I'm just curious to hear what your thoughts are on the interview process of employers, vetting out candidates and bringing them on and onboarding them faster. What are your tips or recommendations for that?
Well, I'll tell you this, that, and this is an unpopular position because a lot of individuals in HR that are older than I am will say that's not true. But in fact, they're defending the black and white. So this statement is about the gray, which is, think about how we sell to a client. When we sell to a client, hi, how's it going? I'm Jason Rivas. Good to meet you. Can I take a few minutes of your time? Absolutely. And we go from that engagement into a deep dive meeting. Talk about what they need, talk about where they're coming from, talk about how we can make that work. Then we ask for the last meeting, hey, can I present how we do this? Sure, no problem. So in 3 meetings, we've gone from a handshake to a decision point. Why is it that businesses are still subscribing to more than 3 touches in engaging a potential employee? Why do we have to have them meet with every friggin' level of the departments of every single, it's the black and white speaking. The gray is this. HR has changed. And if you haven't changed, you need to. HR is about being very in the moment, the right now. HR has a responsibility of digging through applicants. And it's our job to understand that if we see something good in an applicant, chances are other people can see it too. And when other people can see it, we're fighting against them. We have to understand that our competitors are probably seeking for the same person. And because of that, we need to understand we need to aggress faster. We need to move faster. So hiring as an HR person is about move, 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 fast, fast, fast. What are we doing now? What are we doing today? How are we doing tomorrow? What's your plan for tomorrow? Leadership. If you're running a business and your HR person is dragging, you have the wrong HR person interviewing. You have the wrong person recruiting. Maybe it's time to reach out to a recruiter and see if they can expedite the process, because right now, Generation Z and millennials, they don't like more than 2 touches. They might deal with a third, but at the third, they're really asking themselves, is this the right place for me? So the new generation is looking for an instant answer. And they also don't want to hear you talk about yourself in the first engagement. They don't want to hear about all the great things you did. They can look that up. And they guarantee you this, they're going to look up how people are treated. They're going to look through Google reviews. They're going to look in for reviews on LinkedIn and Indeed. They're going to look for anything they can to figure out whether you're a place they want to be. Before they even meet with you, they're checking out your reviews. They're checking you out and they're stalking you on Facebook to see, okay, how do you engage people who don't like you? Because that's going to tell them a lot about how you're going to treat them. Make sense? And so because of this, we're looking at this differently. This is about a gray environment, not the black and white. Black and white would be meeting with different people. Let me ask you to meet with your executive team and this, that, and the other. And after 6 touches, we come to a decision. By that point, the great people you were talking to have now been hired by somebody else because they're moving faster. We need to understand in recruiting, it's a game of moving faster than your competitors, doing it better than your competitors. If your competitors are more dynamic, they're able to move faster, they're more agile than you are, then you're failing at recruiting. So from that, we need to understand after the recruiting, we need to get them started fast. See if we can start somebody within a week, maybe 2 weeks. That's where the onboarding plan comes in. Your tech team, the people inside, if you're working with a managed service company, they need to understand when I hire somebody, I need to put them to work right now, as fast as possible. Now, granted, some people coming in may have to give a 2-week. Great, that just means we have 2 weeks to get everything ready, which means their desk, their technology, their phone, the internet, everything's working, their webcam, everything's set up. That person should not touch one thing to configure their setup on day 1. But they're also doing something else. That first week for Generation Z and millennials is all about experience, how they feel about it. And they will quit after 1 week because they're about making sure they feel valued, that they feel like they want to come back on Monday, the next week. They want to be asked on their last Friday before the weekend, hey, what you got planned this weekend? We were big on that in California where I worked for the managed training company. What do you got going this weekend? Because we understood that we had to get outside of ourselves. And it's not a pitch or a presentation. It's simply giving a damn. And so we have to think about it from that perspective. Be more agile, be more quick, understand competitors of ours, no matter what business you're in, competitors want the best employees like you do, and they may be moving faster. So we need to figure out how to move faster, how to hire faster, how to have a hiring plan, because frankly, if HR is still doing 6 interviews, enough. It is not 1980 anymore. We need to stop trying to apply cassette logic to a digital environment. It no longer works. Like I said before, that status quo is dead.
Sure, sure. And this just leads to my final question. Again, thanks for the time this afternoon. But, just think of a scenario, say for example, there's a smaller business, maybe they got 30 employees and they're having trouble finding people to work for them. Maybe they get a lot of applications and they're just not calling people, or, they just can't find anybody to work for them. And they're having trouble finding employees. What would be the first piece of advice you would give to a company like that? That is, say for example, just 30 employees, say they're in like, manufacturing or something, that's struggling to find employees. What would be the first piece of advice that you would give them?
It's interesting. I just had a conversation a few days ago with a manufacturing company, about 45 employees. They've actually hit a wall with recruiting, and they're in an environment where there should be a glut of talent that are feeding them, because the trade schools around them are just pumping out just well-trained individuals. And what I found was there was a massive disconnect between defending the old, let's put out a post, let's advertise it on Facebook, let's spend $100 on ad revenue to kind of see if we can put out a message, and they sit back and wait. So what I asked is, who's doing your recruiting? And the response was, well, the operating officer is doing it. And I said, is that a joke? And they went, what are you talking about? I said, your COO is dealing with how to run a business more efficiently, how to increase efficiency across the board, and now he has to stop and recruit. I mean, he said, you would want to consider outsourcing your recruiting to get better, because here's the thing. If I were recruiting for you, I would be making relationships with every trade school around me. I'd make sure that every single instructor around me understood my name, what I'm looking for, and how to get a hold of me. Because I'm telling you, I have found great applicants in schools around me. In Nashville, I had relationships with individuals at a lot of the big colleges around me, and I'd say, hey, if you find somebody who's on their way up, call me, make me your first call. In California, I was around a bunch of trade schools, a lot of community colleges, and I made relationships with these instructors. And the department heads saying, hey, if you see somebody coming up, I want to know first. And when they did give me a great reference, I would move fast, because understandably, they're going to be caught up in the scope of thinking, where do I find a job? How do I do it? Because when they graduate, they're sitting there going, great, now what? And I want to be the first person they engage. What I also found with this employer that was having this issue, is that they dedicated no budget to recruiting. They would invest maybe $150 in 2 hours worth of time to putting out an ad and waiting. There was no proactivity. We can no longer wait for applicants to come to us. We have to go to them. We have to go to where they're at. We have to engage them with where they're at, because if they're not seeing us, there's a disconnect. And HR has to be agile. The days of just sitting back waiting for stuff to happen are over. So we have to engage these individuals, these trade schools, these community colleges, these environments where people are at. We need to go to them. I spent countless hours at community colleges in Bakersfield, California, developing relationships, so that way I could make sure that I was feeding my environment full of applicants that were different than anybody else. I got to them first. Sometimes I had to teach somebody how to make a resume, but that just meant that I had to give them that little boost to get started. And that makes a big difference, because so many times these people coming out that are well-trained don't have interview skills, but we expect for them to know how to do it. So when we're interviewing, be kind. Understand that these individuals are brand new to the environment. Maybe they've never interviewed well before, but they're the person that's going to just change how your operation does. I have said it before, and I'll say it again. When you have the right people around you, amazing things happen. And there's not a one person in our environment that we can look at saying that was the perfect applicant, that they interviewed perfectly. Nobody does that. There's no such thing as a perfect interview, no such thing as a perfect applicant. We're looking for the best imperfect we can find, and we find a way to make them better, because they make us better. When they bring their best talent to the workplace, when they bring their heart, their soul, their passion for what they do, holy crap, you'd be amazed with what happens. And you know who gets all that? It's not us as the employer. We get a piece of it. But the best part of that is those great employees, our clients get to experience that. when he answers the phone. Hey, how's it? Hey, George, I haven't heard from you all day, man. It's good to hear from you. And that guy's going, what the hell? This is different. And so when our clients get that better part of who we are, because we hired differently, we look for a different result, we did no longer defended the status quo, it means we're doing something different. And there's nothing wrong with different. We just have to be more agile and figure out how to make it work for ourselves, because the road ahead is different. The road ahead is curved. It's no longer straight.
Yeah, totally. No, that's a really good perspective, thinking about it from that, because, when I thought about applying to a job, it's like, you got to submit your application and then, all these things happen. But, now it's the other way around to an extent too, where employers have to find the talent and find the people that they want, rather than just kind of, it's being a rain catcher versus a rainmaker, so to speak.
Of course.
Really, good
and
analogy for that.
I'm glad you brought that up. The last thing I would give about that, because you gave me an epiphany, and I love that, is that your employment page, your career page should not be boring. I mean, why do we focus so much on the front main page of a website being so damn pretty, but the careers page looks like an obituary? If you want to work here, you press this button, you send in your application. Thank you very much, and God be with you. No, your careers page should be, hey, submit your application. And if you haven't heard back in 24 hours, 48 hours, 72 hours, whatever it is, call this number for an update. That's changing the tide on things. And yes, that's going to make a person reaching for the phone. We're not trying to do things like we used to. We're trying to do things better. And that's how we do it. We have to think about how people perceive us. And when they make that decision to click apply, they're not doing it because they're desperate for a job. They're clicking apply because they recognize something in us that can make them better, and vice versa, something we can do to them and provide to them that can make them different about their lives. Because when you have a great job, when you feel connected to what you do, you no longer feel like you're just paying bills. You no longer feel like you're just paying mortgages. You feel like you're just doing something great. You feel connected. You can't wait to go to work. Because it's not really work. It's just a place you go to see people you like being around. And then I get paid for this. This is cool. So think about how you're recruiting. If you're asking questions that hired people 20 years ago, you got to rethink your questions, because those questions don't apply to the people who are now born, who were born in 97, 98, 2000, who went through 9/11, who went through a recession in 2007, 2008, and saw all the strife, and went through COVID. There's been a lot with this new generation that's made them think differently. So we need to do differently.
Sure. No, that's definitely a really good.
It's wonderful. Well, great position to be in.
Yeah. Well, Jason, I really, really appreciate the time this afternoon. This has been a really great conversation. And
glad to be here.
Again, thank you so much. Well, this concludes episode 6 of the Horizon Managed Services podcast. Be sure to like and subscribe, and we will see you guys next week. Thanks.